Wyoming Territory, 1882. The wind was sharp that morning, and so was the sound of hooves pounding behind her. Marabeth Vaughn did not look back. Her skirts were heavy with dust, her boots scuffed raw from 2 days of running, but she kept going, lungs burning. Somewhere behind her, her father's ranch hands were still trying to drag her back to a life she had no say in and a debt she never made. The sun was high when she stumbled into the edge of a wide valley, rimmed with cottonwoods and a stretch of blue sky that seemed too calm for the panic rattling in her chest. Somewhere in that open stretch of land, a herd of cattle moved slowly, and a lone rider was cutting across them, guiding them with practiced ease. She dropped to her knees behind a rock outcropping, her breath hitching. Her feet throbbed. Her father's voice still echoed in her head, yelling about the money he owed, the land he'd gambled away, and the man twice her age he'd promised her to. She had slipped away before dawn, clutching a satchel with a loaf of bread and her mother's Bible. The rider saw her before she saw him coming. One moment she was gasping in the dirt, the next he was reining in hard, his horse pulling up beside her. He was young, maybe 25, with sun-dark skin and a weathered coat, dust in his dark hair. His eyes, though, were steady and sharp. "You lost?" he asked. Marabeth stared at him, too tired to lie. "I ran," she said. "For my father. He owes money. A lot. He's trying to marry me off to pay it." The man swung off his horse, crouching to her level. "You hurt?" She shook her head. "Just tired." He looked behind her, toward the ridge she had crossed. "Anyone chasing you?" "Not anymore," she said, though she was not sure. He offered her a hand. "Name's Kallen Prescott. I got a ranch a few miles west. Small, quiet. You can rest there." She hesitated. "Why would you help me?" "Because you look like you need it," he said simply. "And I don't much like men who trade their daughters like cattle." Marabeth's fingers curled around his. His grip was warm, solid. She let him lift her to her feet. Kallen's ranch sat between two hills, tucked into a fold of land that caught the light just right at dusk. The house was plain but sturdy, with a porch that looked like it had seen more quiet nights than storms. She sat on the steps while he gave the horse water, her eyes straying to the stretch of land behind the barn, a grave with a wooden cross, weather-worn but tended. "Your family?" she asked after a long stretch of silence. "My brother," Kallen said, tying off the reins, "died 2 winters back. Fever took him." "I'm sorry. Me too." He glanced at her then, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, something steadier. She looked away, her fingers twisting in her lap.
"They'll come looking," she said.
"My father's not the kind to let go. He owes $2,000. I'm the only thing he still owns worth anything." Kallen stepped up beside her, leaning on the post. "Then I will pay it." She blinked. "What?" "I will pay every cent," he said. "You stay here. You stay safe. I'll ride into Cheyenne and settle it. He will not touch you again." She stood, shaken.
"Why?"
"You do not even know me." He looked her in the eyes. "You did not choose this. You should not have to pay for what he did." Marabeth stared at him. "You cannot just give away that kind of money." "I have it," he said. "When my brother died, he left me everything. And I will not spend my life watching good things get broken." Something in her chest cracked. She swallowed hard, then said, "You do not have to save me." "I want to," he said quietly. That night, she slept in a bed for the first time in weeks. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Kallen hammering a loose board on the porch. He worked with quiet focus, every movement sure and calm. When he caught her watching, he gave her a nod and kept working. By noon, he had saddled a fresh horse. "I will be back in 2 days," he told her. "You stay here. Keep the door locked." She stepped off the porch barefoot, the hem of her dress brushing the grass. What if he says no? He will not. And if he tries to take me anyway? Kallen looked at her, then really looked. I will never let that happen. Something warm and painful bloomed behind her ribs. Before he rode off, he handed her a folded paper. My name, my land. If anyone comes, you show them that. This place is yours now, too. She watched him ride away, the wind catching his coat like wings. 2 days later, she was sweeping the porch when she heard the hooves. She froze until she saw the figure on the horse. Her knees went weak. Kallen rode up slow, his face drawn, dusty, but whole. It is done, he said, swinging down. She stared at him. You paid it. Every cent. Your father is not coming. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. You really did it. I gave them a signed paper. You are free. Her throat tightened. You should not have done that. He stepped closer. I wanted to. Why? Because you matter, he said. Because I want you here. For good. She looked up at him, eyes glassy. You do not even know what you are saying. I do, he said. Stay. Let this place be yours too. Let me be yours. The wind shifted. She stepped into his space, heart pounding. I would have nothing to give you. You already gave me something, he said. You sat on my porch like you belonged there. A sound broke from her half-laugh, half-sob, and then he kissed her. It was not rushed or wild. It was steady, like him, like safety. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. I think I was always running toward you, she whispered. You are not running anymore, he said. And she never did again. The first frost came early that year, tracing the porch slats in white and curling the edges of the last sunflowers behind the barn. Marabeth wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and watched the steam rise from the pail as Kallen poured warmed mash into the trough. The cattle were quiet in the cold, but he moved among them with the same ease he always had. You always up before the sun? She asked, her voice low, still rasped from sleep. Kallen looked over his shoulder. Old habit. Easier to hear what the day wants from you when it's still quiet. She stepped down the porch slowly, careful not to slip on the rimed boards. What's it saying this morning? That you might catch cold if you're not careful, he said, handing her a cup of coffee he'd left near the stove. She accepted it with both hands, the heat seeping into her fingers. You always this bossy or just around me? He didn't answer right off. Instead, he leaned against the fence rail and looked out toward the line of cottonwoods beyond the pasture. You ever worked a branding? He asked. She shook her head. He glanced at her hands. You got the build for it. Strong wrists. Careful fingers. I used to stitch for the general store before. She stopped, then drew a breath. I'm not afraid of work. I know, he said. They stood in silence after that, not out of tension, but something more settled. She sipped her coffee. He checked the cinch on the sorrel gelding tied near the gate. The horse flicked its ears, but stood calm under his touch. Later that morning, she found a bundle of worn gloves and a canvas apron folded on the kitchen table. You think I won't burn myself? She asked when he came in from the barn. I think you'll figure it out faster than most. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he poured water into the basin. You don't talk much about your brother. I talked enough when he was alive, he said, drying his hands on a towel. Now I do the listening. She didn't press. Instead, she picked up the gloves, testing the weight of them. If I'm to help, I need to learn the land. You'll learn it better walking than riding, he said. I'll show you the fence lines after supper. They didn't say much while they ate. The stew was simple, the bread uneven but warm. She noticed he always passed her the plate first, always waited until she had enough before taking his share. Not out of habit, like someone who'd gone without long enough to make sure others didn't. When dusk came, they walked the edge of the west pasture. The sky turned lavender behind the hills, and the first stars blinked out where the trees thinned. Why'd you stay here? She asked as they stepped over a dry creek. After he passed. There wasn't anywhere else pulling me, he said. Place raised us. Felt wrong to let it go to seed. You ever think about leaving? Used to. When I was younger. He paused. Didn't have much reason to stay until you showed up. She stopped walking. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, he said. But I wake up easier knowing you're here. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her voice softened in a way that surprised even her. You're different than men I've known. He tilted his head. That a compliment? That depends, she said, stepping closer. You ever let someone else drive cattle with you? He smiled, not a wide thing, just a quiet pull at the corner of his mouth. Not yet. Then I'll be the first, she said. They walked on, shoulder to shoulder, their shadows long on the grass. Neither of them reached for the other, but something passed between them in those slow steps, something sure as winter coming, steady as hoofbeats over frozen ground. The wind picked up, pulling a few last leaves loose from the cottonwoods. She didn't flinch at the cold. Not anymore. The snow came in long, low sighs across the prairie, quiet and constant. By early December, the fields around the ranch lay under a soft white hush, broken only by the breath of cattle and the creak of barn doors pulled open before dawn. Marabeth had taken to wearing Kallen's old coat when she went out to tend the chickens, the sleeves too long but the warmth welcome. He found her one evening kneeling in the root cellar, sorting through the burlap sacks of potatoes and turnips they'd pulled before the frost set in. She had a pencil behind her ear and a scrap of paper held flat against a crate, marking out what they had left. You keep tallies like a quartermaster, he said, resting his shoulder against the door frame. It's how I learned to manage things at home, she said, not looking up. When my mother passed, there wasn't anyone else who'd mind the pantry. You ever think about running a place of your own? She folded the list. I never let myself think past the next week. Now I'm starting to. Kallen stepped down into the cellar, the lantern he held casting long shadows behind him. I've been thinking too, he said. There's land east of the creek. I've left it fallow, but it's good for wheat. We could clear it in spring.
We.
If you want it. Marabeth met his eyes, the paper still in her hand. You mean to give me a field? I mean to ask if you'll stay long enough to sow it. She ran her fingers along the edge of the crate. I've never planted anything that belonged to me. Then it's time you did. Later that night, she sat in the rocking chair by the stove, mending the hem of one of his shirts. The stitching was crooked at first, her fingers stiff from the cold, but she kept at it. Kallen sat across from her, carving a new handle for the draw knife that had split that morning. The wood shavings curled on the floor between them. You think we'll get much snow? She asked without looking up. Hard to say. When the elk move early, it usually means a hard winter. I saw tracks near the South Ridge yesterday, she said. 2 adults, maybe a yearling between them. He raised an eyebrow. You're reading sign now? I pay attention. He set down the blade and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You've taken to this place faster than I expected. I think it's always been in me, she said. I just never had a place to let it out. He nodded slowly. Come spring, we'll need to put in a new fence line along the east boundary. If you're willing, I'd like your help planning it. She looked up, her needle paused in the fabric. You want me to help with that? I trust your judgment. No one had ever said that to her before, not like that. She folded the shirt neatly when she finished and set it on the table. I'm not going anywhere, Kallen. He didn't say anything right away. Then he stood, crossed the space between them, and knelt beside her chair. I know I said I brought you here to keep you safe, he said, voice low but steady. But I want more than that. I want you beside me, not just under my roof. She reached out, brushing a curl of wood from his shirt sleeve. You already have me beside you. He took her hand, calloused fingers curling gently around hers. Then let's build something that lasts. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. I think it already has. Outside, the snow deepened, softening the edges of the world. But inside the house, lit by stove glow and quiet resolve, everything was coming into shape slow and sure, like a field thawing under spring sun. The lantern on the table guttered as the wind pressed at the windows, and outside, the white-blanketed world settled deeper into silence. Inside, Marabeth stood with her hands buried in a basin of flour, sleeves rolled past her elbows. The dough stuck to her knuckles, but she worked it patiently, her movements slow and methodical. Kallen leaned against the doorframe, his shirt open at the throat from the heat of the stove. You ever baked rye before? No, she said, dusting her hands on her apron. But I've read enough recipes to make a guess. He stepped forward and reached for the kettle. We'll know by morning if guessing's good enough. She gave a small huff, not quite a laugh. If it's ruined, I'll feed it to the pigs. They might thank you either way. She glanced at him. You ever think about buying more stock? He poured water into the tin cups beside the stove. That land we talked about clearing, it'd hold another herd easy. But that'd mean building another barn come summer. She turned the dough one last time before placing it in the tin pan and setting it by the stove. I could draw up a plan. I've seen how they frame them out north of Laramie stone footings, low profile. Keeps the heat better. Kallen studied her, the quiet certainty in her words, the way she moved now like she belonged. You ever consider what you want beyond the next season? She wiped her hands on the rag and leaned against the table, her brow furrowed. Not really. I think I stopped thinking long-term the day my mother took sick. He waited. But now, she said slowly, I want to learn how to grow things with roots deeper than one season. I don't just want to stay, I want to build. He nodded once, solemn. Then we'll build. The wind rattled the stovepipe, and the fire hissed low as he added another log. She moved to the cupboard, pulling down a tin of dried apples. You ever celebrate Christmas? She asked. Not since I was a boy. She poured the fruit into a pot, adding sugar and water without measuring. My mother used to make a pie from these. We'd eat it cold in the morning. He sat at the table, watching her stir. You want to mark it this year? She hesitated, then nodded. I think we should. He said nothing more, just rested his hands on the table as she worked beside the stove, her face flushed from the heat. The rhythm of the place had shifted since she arrived, not louder, not faster, just fuller. Later that week, he brought in a cedar bough from the ridge, the needles still green and sharp with resin. She smiled when he set it on the table. You remembered. You said you wanted to mark it. She tied a strip of muslin into a bough and set it atop the bough. It's strange, having traditions again. He brushed a bit of bark from his shoulder. Strange good. She nodded. Strange like breathing after holding her breath too long. That night, she didn't retreat to the spare room. Instead, she sat beside him on the settee, her knees drawn up beneath the quilt he'd unfolded. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. I used to think love was always loud, she said softly. Fireworks and poetry. But it isn't, is it? No, he said. Sometimes it's just doing chores together and not wanting the day to end. She turned her head toward him. You think you could love someone like me? With all the things I've had to carry. I already do, he said. She looked at him a long time, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. Then she leaned in, slow and sure, and kissed him like a promise. When she pulled back, there was no hesitation in her voice. Then let's stop waiting. He cradled her face in his hand, thumb brushing her cheek. No more waiting. Outside, the wind calmed. Inside, the fire held, and the world, for the first time in years, felt still enough to grow something lasting. Marabeth stood barefoot in the doorway, watching the first light stretch over the frost-rimed pasture. Her hair was pinned back loose, curls soft around her neck, and her hands rested lightly on the edge of her shawl. The barn roof glistened faintly, thin ice catching the sun like a held breath. Kallen was already out beyond the fence, driving the cattle toward the southern slope where the snow had thawed early. When he came back through the gate, his gloves tucked into his belt and his breath rising in clouds, she stepped out to meet him. "There's something I need to ask you," she said, voice quiet but firm. He stopped, brushing a bit of hay off his coat. "All right." She held his gaze. "You said once that this place raised you. That it was your brother's too." He nodded slowly. "I want to know if you'd be willing to bury a new stone beside his. Not for anyone gone, but for something starting." He looked at her for a long moment, then set his gloves down on the porch rail. "You want to place something permanent. Something that says this is ours. Not just yours, not just mine." He stepped closer until their boots touched. "Then we'll carve it together." They cleared the ground with a spade that afternoon, the earth still stiff from the cold. She dug alongside him, her hands raw but steady. When the hole was level, he fetched a flat stone from the creek and brought it up in the wheelbarrow, water still clinging to its sides. With careful hands, she etched a mark at the center, a single line branching into two, like a sapling splitting skyward. That night, after the dishes were done and the coals banked low, she picked up a folded piece of muslin she'd kept tucked behind the bread tin. Inside was a small silver chain tarnished, but hole taken from her mother's sewing basket years ago. She held it out. "I didn't have anything to bring when I came here," she said, "but I'd like to wear this again. If you'd be the one to fasten it." Kallen took it carefully and stepped behind her, fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he clasped it. "It's fitting," he said quietly. Something kept, not taken. She turned to face him, the chain resting just above her collarbone. "I'd like us to marry before the thaw, under that cottonwood by the ridge." He didn't smile, didn't speak right away, but his hands cupped her face with reverence. "You'll be my wife," he said, "in every season." The weeks that followed moved slow and full. Marabeth traded 2 sacks of dried beans and a spool of thread for a length of linen in town, which she stitched into a simple dress in the evenings by firelight. Kallen built a bench from the old cedar planks behind the shed, saying little, but sanding every edge smooth. On the first warm day of March, with the creek running clear again and the cattle lowing in the south pasture, they stood beneath the cottonwood's bare branches, the carved stone behind them and the land stretching quiet around. Kallen held her hands, his voice low but steady. "There's no promise I make lightly," he said, "but this one I want to grow old inside of." Marabeth's reply came soft, but sure. "I won't leave. Not ever. Not because I'm afraid, but because I choose you." They kissed, not with urgency, but with quiet finality, the kind of kiss that settled something deeper than words. That evening, they ate bread warm from the oven, and she poured him cider from the last jug they'd stored before winter. The windows were open, and the curtains stirred with the first hints of spring. Their chairs sat side by side. When he reached for her hand, she twined her fingers through his. Years passed like steady seasons. They built a second barn together, planted wheat that rose clean and gold by July, and trained a pair of sheepdogs that herded better than any hand Kallen had ever hired. Marabeth taught herself to bind books in the winter months, stitching pages with the same care she once gave to seams. Kallen carved her a writing desk from pine, and she filled a drawer with letters, even if she had no one to send them to. They never had children, though they tried. It ached some days, but not in the way that broke anything. Instead, they raised calves and gardens, and at night, they read aloud by lamplight, his voice rough on consonants, hers catching on the poetry she liked best. When Kallen's hair turned silver at the temples, Marabeth caught her reflection beside his and smiled. "We've worn the years well." He kissed her temple, his hand resting on hers. "They've worn easier with you." In the end, there was no great event, no final hardship. Just the steady rhythm of two people who had chosen each other, every day, over and over. And when their neighbors spoke of the couple whose porch light never went dark, who planted cedars where others built fences, it was always with quiet respect. Because theirs was a life not loud, not grand, but honest.
Shared.
And it lasted.